everyone. Today, in this very short session, we are going to talk about something that is very important. We're going to talk about teacher self-care and the links to student well-being. It's important to take care of yourself so that you can provide effective social-emotional learning support for students. In this very quick session, we will identify the link between teachers' implementation of self-care strategies on students' well-being. These will be our objectives for today. We will review research on educator self-care. We will understand the importance of prioritizing self-care. And we will identify types of self-care and commit to a self-care plan. Research on educator self-care shows that self-care is important because a teacher's presence can set the tone for learning in their classroom. Positive climate is directly linked to students' academic success. Managing behavior can be greatly influenced by a teacher's mood and presence. Teachers that are better able to address issues before they become a problem can anticipate student needs and deliver redirection calmly and with limited emotion, have much better managed classrooms. Another reason that self-care is important is because educators are at risk for experiencing compassion fatigue or secondary traumatic stress. Compassion fatigue, which is emotional duress or preoccupation with absorbing trauma and emotional stresses of others, can create a secondary traumatic stress in educators or in the school community. Secondary traumatic stress could lead to the burnout cascade. The burnout cascade results from a breakdown in educators' ability to cope over time and is viewed as having 3 dimensions: emotional exhaustion, which is the inability to cope with stress and demands; depersonalization, which is when you might become a little callous or cynical; and feeling of lack of accomplishment. Burned out teachers and the learning environments that they create can have harmful effects on students, especially students who are at risk of mental health problems. We want to avoid this. Luckily, with a bit of planning and intention, we can through self-care. So what is self-care and what does it look like? Self-care is self-preservation. Self-care is not a one-size-fits-all approach. It is very important that you find the method of self-care that is right for you and your present situation. What worked a few years ago might be different, and it's important to be reflective and think about that. There are different types of self-care: physical, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual. We are going to dive into each of these in the next slide and think about what works best for you. Each one is important and should be applied mindfully based on the needs of the individual or the situation. Of the 4 types of self-care, each strategy may look different. Self-care doesn't have to cost a lot of money or take a lot of time. Physical self-care might focus on the physical health of the body, making sure that you eat when you're supposed to eat, sleep when you're supposed to sleep, and exercise. Another thing might be sensations, noticing sights, smells, sounds, tastes, or touch, taking pleasure in things. Emotional self-care are activities that promote positive emotions, whether they're interpersonal or intrapersonal. It could just be a phone call to a really good friend, or maybe a really good laugh. Pull up some funny videos on YouTube. Intellectual self-care builds our cognitive skills, our knowledge base. Something new, like learning a language or challenging ourselves, can be a great way to build intellectual self-care. Even playing a fun game, completing a to-do list. Spiritual self-care is our connection to something greater than ourselves. It can be religious or secular, philosophical. It's anything that adds meaning to our lives, from attending a service to watching a sunset. Each are important and should be applied mindfully, based on the needs of the individual or situation. Before we close out, let's take a minute to think about how we can commit to self-care. Choose one self-care practice that you can commit to for the next week. Just 1 minute a day can make a difference. I look forward to seeing what you write about on the discussion board.